Welcome, welcome, everyone. We'll give folks a few minutes to join us and then we'll get started. I'm Jen, looking forward to chatting with you throughout today's seminar. Go ahead and let us know where you're joining from and who you are. So in the chat, let us know your name, what types of programs you're applying to, and where you're joining from today. Also, if you want to tell me your favorite, for those of you who are currently in a place where it is summer, your favorite summer treat, love to hear that in the chat. For those of you who aren't in a place where it's currently summer, tell me what we're dreaming of. What sort of ice cream summer treat are you hoping for when it gets to be summer? We'll give people just a few minutes to join us, and then we will get started. We got a lot to cover today. Hey, Matthew joining us from North Carolina, not too far away from me. In Atlanta. We'll talk more about that. For those of you just joining, we're saying hi in the chat while we wait for people to join today. So your name, where you're joining from, and what types of programs you're looking to apply to. And like Matthew, you can tell me your favorite summer treat. I like this homemade ice cream. It's one of my favorite summer activities. And we'll just give people another minute or two. Hey, Medina, nice to see you today. And yeah, we'll give people another minute or two and then we'll dive right into it. All right. Ooh, mango, absolutely. We got people. Whoa, it's all coming in now. I love to see it. I love to see people joining us from all over. It's awesome. Lots of different types of programs as well. Perfect. All right. We're going to get started in just a minute. For those of you who are just joining us, go ahead, drop in the chat your name, where you're joining from today, what types of programs you're applying to, and your favorite summer treat. I'm ready for a snack if you can't tell. Yeah, we got some watermelon coming in the chat. Always delicious. All right, keep those coming in the chat. I know that more people will be joining us over the next couple of minutes, but we got a lot to cover today, and I want to make sure we have enough time to hit all of your questions as well. So let's get right into it. Today, we're going to be talking about planning for admission season. Feels really big, feels really intimidating. I know from my experience when I was applying. So hopefully we're going to demystify the process a little bit, give you some actionable tips you can walk away from, and answer some of those questions that you're thinking of. So a little bit about me. I'm Jen. I'm the Senior Curriculum Manager for admissions. I lead up our admissions team here at Magoosh. I've been here for 5 years and I've worked with students across the GRE, the GMAT, the MCAT, the LSAT, admissions. And this is my favorite part of what I do. Some of you who have joined us before have heard me say that, but it continues to be true. I love talking to students. I especially love talking to students about admissions. I know that when I was applying for graduate school, I really had no idea what I was doing. Felt very alone and very lost. And so whatever I can do to make that a little bit less of the feeling you're having is great. My background, I have a BA in history and social thought from UCLA. I'm currently a PhD candidate in US history at Emory University. I am in steamy Atlanta, Georgia, where it is deep summer right now. And I'm definitely going to go get some ice cream after this. So we're going to go over some questions here, but before we do that, I just want to shout out, we will have some dedicated time to take your questions, but you can drop questions for me at any point, whenever they come up. Just use that Q&A tab, drop them there. It'll be the easiest place for me to see them and keep track of them, and ask them at any time. I'll have some dedicated times and I'll keep an eye on it. But today, this class is really, for those of you who have been asking yourself, when should I start applying? What materials do I need? And who do I go to with questions? This is sort of our big picture, talking about what's next. How do we get started? So let's start with just what does a graduate application include? There are some major components. The application forms, and we'll go over each of these components, but the major components that pretty much all of your applications will have, with one exception here. Most every application will include some version of these. Your application forms, your college transcripts, a CV or resume, test scores, so GRE if you're applying to master's or PhD programs, the GMAT if you're applying to business school. We'll talk about the GRE. Some schools are test optional, so some of you may not have to take tests at all. For those of you applying from schools outside of the US, you may have the TOEFL or IELTS as well. So this is just your standardized test scores. And then letters of recommendation and a statement of purpose or personal statement. Now there's other components that may be included, things like diversity statements, writing samples, short answer questions. But these are the major components that pretty much every application is going to have. So let's go through and just, hit a couple of like major points on each of these before we dive into questions. Okay, so let's start with forms and transcripts. This is an area of the application that I notice students, and I know I certainly did, don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to. It seems pretty simple, seems pretty, this won't be hard. I can tell you that the application forms take way more time than you might think. Some of them, like there were some schools that my application forms were so many pages worth of putting in information. There was one school that I applied to that I had to like type in every class I ever took, even though I had my transcript as well. These are important. These are things that you want to keep an eye on in terms of like chunking out your time. They do matter. And I know that this is sort of something that feels like, I can speed through it. I'm just putting in my name and like demographic information. But these are areas where you want to make sure everything's right. You want to make sure everything matches your other materials. Part of applying to graduate school is, telling your story and telling who you are and why you would be a good fit. And part of it's also like proving that you can follow directions, unfortunately. And so you really want to pay attention in the application forms. They matter. There are things you want to have a lot of attention on. Sometimes they can determine different sort of considerations or funding. So you want to have time here. I think a good thing to do, a lot of applications will let you save in the middle of them. You don't have to do it all at once. And these are good things when you have maybe a little bit less brain space for like writing a statement of purpose, but want to make some forward progress. Your application forms are a great place to sit down and just sort of do the forms, save it, come back with the rest of the material later. Don't save these all till the last day. Then college transcripts. A common question I get from students are, do I need to have all of my transcripts? You need to show all of your college work. And so that is either a transcript from every institution that you have been to, or if your graduating institution includes your transcripts from previous schools, you want to make sure they're there. This is something where you want to be upfront about things. You don't want to hide things. Schools use services to do a transcript background check. They will know if you applied or if you attended a school and didn't give transcripts. This is one where even if you have something on your transcript that maybe you are worried about, it's better to be upfront and talk about it than let it come out afterwards. This can be a disqualifying event, not including a transcript. The other thing we want to think about with transcripts are they can take a while to get. You want to make sure for your applications, most of them now will accept a PDF, the e-copy that you get through your institution. I think there are still some schools, maybe not now that we're a few years into COVID, but there were a few schools when I applied back in 2016 where I had to send physical transcripts, weirdly enough. So these are things you want to check. You want to make sure, in general, anything in your application that you're waiting on someone else 4, that you're giving yourself extra time. And for those of you who are joining us from outside the US, applying to schools in the US, this is something where you really are going to want to reach out to the school you're applying to, maybe their international student office, and see if you need a transcript review service. Sometimes you'll need to do that to convert your transcript to US formats. So this is something, again, might take more time on. You want to really think about, get ahead of. And I see questions coming in. Go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. We'll jump to them in just a minute. And finally, kind of the other forms and transcripts that I would consider is your CV. This is a little bit different than, it's a lot different than a resume. It's longer. It really is dealing with your educational background and your work experience. I hate doing my CV. It's like one of those, kind of admin chores I just don't have fun with. I don't know who likes doing it, but it's something that is really important. It's showcasing your skills, your experiences, and you want to put time into it. So a CV is another great thing to sort of sit down with early in the process, see what you have, see what you need to add. If you don't have one, look at some examples, and then, knock out parts of it over time. All right, we got a couple of questions I'm going to take before we move on to our next major component. I see one in the chat. Yeah, so this is a great question from Jen in the chat about how to get access to application forms outside of application season when you can't get through the web portal, right? It's a great question. I love you wanting to get ahead. I think what I would advise here is that this is a case to reach out to a graduate coordinator or a graduate director of graduate studies. So what Jen is saying is that most of these applications now are online. They're usually through a web portal. And they often won't open until August or September. So you can't actually start on it just now. The first thing that I would do before you reach out actually to the graduate coordinator or the director of graduate studies is go on each program's website in their graduate program little section and poke around on every link that you can poke on. And oftentimes there will be an actual listing in there of sort of the components, the things that they ask for. If you don't find that, then that's a chance to reach out, let a DGS or a graduate coordinator know that you're thinking that you want to apply, that you're interested in applying, and you're starting to get your application together. Ask them if they can tell you those major components. Keep these questions coming, guys. I love it. Okay, do transcripts typically have to be ordered and sent individually to each grad program you're applying to, or do schools accept copies? It depends here. So sometimes, Patrick, this is a great question. This is one where you're going to want to be really clear on what each individual program is looking for. Some programs want official transcripts at the time of application. In those cases, you'll need to order directly. They'll either be they usually will be electronically delivered, or you'll be given a secure PDF that you can share. Some schools won't need an official transcript before you apply. They'll take an e-copy basically, and then you can send your official transcript at the point of admission. They won't pretty much ever take like just a straight copy. You're going to need to provide that sort of authenticated e-copy or an official transcript. So this is something to just be really mindful of as you're reading through directions. What are their transcript requirements? And this is something you want to start early as well. Wow, we have a bunch of questions. Keep them coming. I'm going to take maybe one or two more right now. We'll step to the next component, and then we'll come back to questions. So if I don't get to yours just now, don't worry, we'll get to it. Okay, we got a question here about, some schools require one-page business resumes. That's a great question. We do have materials that we share for our Magoosh subscribers in our Discord. I don't know if I have a one-page business resume right now, but I can look that up. If you come into Discord, which we'll share a link for how to join later, we can see what we can find there. All right, one more question and then we'll move on to the next thing and we'll come back to questions in a minute. So great question from Shelley here. If we're applying for programs with longer experience, more than 8 years of experience, how far back should we list our experiences in resume? This is a great question. I think that it depends on what format's being asked of you. If you're being asked for a CV, CVs are longer than 1 page. If you look at the CVs for professors at schools that you would work with, they can be 30 pages long. They're listing everything. Your CV isn't going to be that long, but your CV can be multiple pages. So if you're applying with a CV, I think you want to go back as far as you have relevant experiences. You don't want to list every single thing you've ever done if it doesn't apply to the program. But if it's something that you think has taught you a skill or has given you knowledge or will make you a better candidate, you can go ahead and list that. You want to make sure that you're tailoring your listings to sort of play up the skills that you think are important. And we can talk later about how you want your CV and your statement of purpose or personal statement to be in conversation with each other. But if you're making that CV, you can go back as far as your relevant experiences are there. It can be really helpful to talk about, a breadth of experience. So don't worry about that. If it's a resume, then you need to get a little bit more sort of focused on I gotta hit the highlights, but most of the time it'll be a CV. All right, great questions in the Q&A and then the chat. Keep dropping them in the Q&A. We'll come back to the next ones in just a minute. Okay, the next major component, a lot of you are probably thinking about because you're joining us from Magoosh. It's the GRE or the GMAT. First question I get from students is, do I need to take the GRE? What does test optional mean? And that is a great and important question. Do you need to take the GRE? Maybe. The first thing that you want to find out is the GRE required? If it is, then we will talk about what score you need. If it is listed that the GRE is optional, this is when you want to do a little bit more research and find out what your program means by optional. My sort of short answer to a long GRE history is that a lot of schools over the past, I'd say 10 years or so, have been moving away from the GRE as a requirement for a variety of reasons. Now, COVID in some ways accelerated that decision-making for some schools because of the way that inequities and the difficulties around taking the online tests. Some schools just dropped it. And for some, that's a permanent decision. Other schools we may see reinstating the GRE this year as there are more open testing sites. And then other schools are going to have the GRE as optional. And what you really want to discover when a school says GRE optional is, great, how is the GRE factored into the decision-making process? There's usually a couple of different ways. There's when the GRE is considered from the actual program level about whether or not you should be admitted as a student. And then it's considered with this whole package of your written materials, your transcripts, everything else. The other way that the GRE can often be considered is separate from that actual admissions decision, but tied to funding levels. So you may not need the GRE to get into the program, but you would in that case need the GRE or a good score on it to get funding. That's a really important thing for you to know. I don't ever want students to not, full disclosure, if you don't have to take the GRE, you shouldn't take the GRE. It's not worth your time or money. But I never want students to not take the GRE because it's not required for admission, but is going to hurt them on the funding level. So you really want to figure out what test optional means. This is where, again, reaching out directly to the department and just asking how the GRE is considered is important. Now, there are some other schools where it really is optional. It doesn't factor into funding. and isn't a requirement for admissions. And you might be asking yourself, well, if it's really optional in that case, why would I want to take it? There are some places where the GRE can help boost other aspects of your application. So maybe you don't have the GPA that you want. A really good GRE score can be a good balance to that. Maybe you are switching disciplines. You're switching from the humanities to a STEM field, or vice versa. And in that case, showing, oh, I have strong performance in the verbal or the quant section can be another way of just sort of boosting the overall profile. So there are some of you who may have a truly test optional experience and still want to take it because it can just help the overall application. So that leads into, well, what score do I need? This is the annoying answer that I give. Students groan when I say it, but I trust me and go with me for a minute here. A good GRE score is the score that gets you into graduate school. That can mean a lot of different things. I will say, I've seen over my years of working with graduate applicants, GRE takers, and my own experience, it can get really easy to focus exclusively on the GRE. It's this thing that we feel we can control. If I study, if I take a lot of practice tests, I can get a really good score. And that is largely true. But sometimes that attitude means that we end up giving more importance to the GRE than it actually is worth. It's one part of a whole constellation of factors that go into your decision making. Now, there are some programs where it is super important. Having a good quant score applying to a PhD in economics is a top 10 program in economics is generally a requirement. But for most of us, I would say almost for all of us, the GRE isn't going to be the be all end all. And so I think what's really important is to figure out as much as you can what schools are looking for. What are the scores of the average admitted student? Are there cutoffs? But then also think about how the GRE factors into the rest of your application. And I'm happy to take more questions about the GRE and sort of score planning, but I think my biggest takeaway for you is this. Every hour that you spend preparing for the GRE or the GMAT is an hour that you're not spending on another area of your application. And I have seen students who have spent all of their time almost focused on the GRE and gotten really good scores, but then rush their application essays and not get into programs. And I can't say for certain why people didn't get in, but I can say that application essay has much more weight generally than a score on its own. So that's something that you want to consider. When should you start studying? When do you need to take the test by? This is where, and in general for planning for application season, I say start from your first application deadline and work backwards from there. So with the GRE, you want to consider that you want to give about 2 weeks from test date to when your application is due to make sure scores get in, just to be safe. I advise all GRE students that I talk to plan to take the test twice. This is because sometimes we need to take the test again because we don't get the score we want, or sometimes things just happen. You're on your way to the test site and you have a massive headache and traffic is bad and you're just having an off day. Giving yourself two times, hopefully you only have to take it once. I mean, hopefully you never have to take it, but hopefully you only have to take it once. But you want to build into your schedule 2 times if possible. And you want to remember that you have to wait 21 days between test attempts. So just working your way back there. I think in general, giving yourself at least 3 months to study is the ideal. I know that that's not possible for a lot of students. That is, for a lot of us, it's closer to a month to 2 months. This is one where you're going to have to think about your score goals, take a practice test to start off, see where your baseline is, And then think about how much time you have to devote to the GRE every day. When I was working with GRE students one-on-one, a thing that I always said was like, you want to be really realistic about your schedule. I would have students that would be like, oh, I'm going to study 6 hours a day. Nobody should be studying for the GRE 6 hours a day. It's actually, I think, pedagogically not going to pay the dividends you think it will. But also for most of us, we don't actually have 6 hours in the day to dedicate to it. And my students that would set up unrealistic study schedules that said, I'm going to study every day for, a lot of hours every day, were the ones who often got discouraged because they couldn't meet that. So set realistic goals, both with the score and your time, and start early. You give yourself more time. If you get done early, then you have free time. You get to go eat more ice cream and hang out. All right, I think we have some GRE questions. I'm going to hit some of those. I am still paying attention to the non-GRE questions. Okay, would a GMAT GRE waiver reduce your chance of getting a scholarship? It's that is a good question, and I see we have a couple of questions here around waivers, and should we take advantage of them? This is something that I can't say for certain, because it'll differ from school to school. And this is where reaching out to individual schools and knowing how the GMAT or the GRE factors into their decision-making process is really important. If it doesn't matter at all, if it can only add, let's say, to your application, it can only add something but can't take something away, and it doesn't have anything to do with funding, then you want to sit down and think, is there a part of my application that I think would be boosted from a really strong score? If it factors into funding, you should take it. We all should get as much funding as we can get. But these are just questions that I think, you really want to check with a school and see, how is this factored into your decision-making process? We got a question here. Do schools see all GRE scores from all attempts? Generally, no. I think there have been in the past some schools that would see all scores. They would tell you ahead of time, and I can't think off the top of my head any programs that are still doing that. So it's usually the score that you submit. Now, remember, you have to submit the entire test. You can't pick and choose. There's no super scoring. So you can't, with the GRE, say, I'm going to take the verbal from this test and the quant from this test and the AWA from this. It's the overall score. But for most schools, they're not, I can't think of any schools off the top of my head that want to see all attempts. It is something, though, that you should, again, be reading every page on that graduate website for the programs you're attending, and see if there are any questions here. And if you're unsure, reach out to the Director of Graduate Studies. Does a good GMAT score increase the chance of winning scholarships? Yeah, good scores can help that for schools where it matters. There are some schools, though, that funding is not at all tied to test scores. So you just want to be clear here. We've got a lot of GRE GMAT questions. This is great. Gideon's asking a question about the 70th percentile. I don't know what that score is right now. I haven't looked at the recent percentiles. Gideon, if you ask that in Discord, I can post to the most recent test score sheets. Rachel's asking, the goal Magoosh has set for me has been on average a bit over 3 hours a day. Is that effective? I think 3 hours is in the sweet spot. I think that in general, when I was advising students, I think that studying anything for over 4 hours a day, sustained multiple days over time, is a really quick way to burn out. It's not the way most of our brains work. I think 3 hours is a good amount of time. I would say, Rachel, and anyone else who's doing kind of extended times, take breaks, switch between things. Sometimes in order to get something down, we need to sort of take our eyes off of it. I know when I'm writing, sometimes like banging my head against the wall to like try to figure something out doesn't work, and I need to go make dinner or watch Netflix or take a run. And doing that and turning my brain off, actively thinking about the problem suddenly opens things up. So I would say, working a bit over 3 hours a day, yeah, that's right in the sweet spot. You're going to want to make sure that you are taking breaks in there, stretch, look away from your screen, and vary up the material you're going over. I always was a fan of telling students to do, alternating sets of quant and verbal, or different kinds of verbal or different kinds of quant, and that'll help make it a little bit less monotonous. So many questions. Keep asking them. Okay, I'm gonna see if there's just any more GRE scores. I see a couple of people asking about like specific scores and if they're sufficient. That's a hard question for me to answer, because there's not I know that that's frustrating, but it's hard to say this is the score at every school that will get you in. I will say, what you want to do is look at programs, see what average admitted scores are, see what's going on there, and then compare your scores to sort of the rest of the application. Work experience matters, research matters, internships matter, often more than a test. I would also say you want to kind of think about how much score improvement you can do. So if you are at a 165 in quant, how much time would it take to get that score up to like a 167 or a 168? And then really ask yourself, are those couple of extra points enough to change something in the application? I think generally no, especially if you have work experience and internships, but these are things where you're going to want to reach out to programs. What happens if we send 2 sets of GRE scores to colleges? Do they consider the latest the highest? If you send 2 sets, they'll probably look at both. That's a great question. I think it depends on the school. They'll probably look at both. They may ask some questions about, is there a big difference between the two? Is there something that, is it showing, did you have a low test score in the first attempt and a higher test score the second time? That generally, upward trends generally look good. But, are there major discrepancies? I would advise just sending 1 set of scores, your best set of overall scores, and to think again, one thing that we haven't talked about is thinking about what you want to present from your test score. So if you're applying to STEM programs, generally the quant is going to be more important. If you're applying to humanities programs, generally the verbal is going to be more important. So these are things that you want to keep in mind. I think it's just important to sort of know what's most important to your own goals and your own program. And so, maybe you're applying to a STEM program, one of your test scores, is a much higher quant, and you made a good improvement in the verbal across the 2, but the one with the higher verbal is a lower quant score. You probably want to go with the higher quant, even though that verbal isn't as great. But I would advise just sending 1 set. Okay, I'm going to take one more GRE question. We'll come back to questions. As always, I'm like feeling the clock. So if you begin GRE prep 3 months prior and at the beginning level, how many hours a day should one give to prepare? I think, again, that sweet spot of, somewhere between 2 and 4 hours. And I would evaluate that. So, do that for a week or 2 and see, like, am I actually studying for 3 hours? Am I actually focused on the exam for that time? I also just think as you start your GRE prep, taking a practice test at the beginning to give yourself a baseline, to just know where you're at, is really going to help dictate, how much time you need to put in. Maybe you take that baseline and you're like, hey, I'm kind of close to where I want to be. I don't need as much time. That'll be important as well. All right, these are great. Keep the questions coming. I promise I'm going to try to get to all of them. And the ones that I don't get to today, if there are any, I will record a special video and post it in our Discord to answer them. But let's go to the next major component, letters of recommendation. I get questions about this from students all the time. First question is, who should I ask? And I'm going to answer this broadly with my advice, and then we can talk about sort of the more specific questions that come up with circumstances. In general, you want to ask for letters of recommendation from the people who know you the best, who can write you strong letters of recommendation. And I use the word strong intentionally. That is the language you should be using when you ask your recommenders. You want to ask them, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? You want letters from, in general, the people who can write you the strongest letters. And that is going to be really critical to sort of putting together your recommenders package. Now, there are schools that have different requirements. Generally, if you're applying to a research-based program, you are going to have at least 2, if not all of those recommenders be professors, be people from the university. If you're applying to professional programs, MBAs, more professional master's programs, oftentimes you will want 1 or 2, managers or folks that you work with to write those. So you want to think about those requirements, and then you want to think about who's going to be able to write me the strongest. You also want to think about your recommenders. The first priority should be those strongest letters, but you also want to think about your goals, what you want to be doing in grad school, and who can help sort of flesh out those goals and your ability to reach them. So, if you really want to go into teaching, for example, and you have 2 people who can write you strong letters, and one has a lot of knowledge about your teaching and one maybe has less knowledge about that, you probably want to pick the person who can speak to your teaching ability. But the first and foremost, you want to think about strong letters. For those of you who are going to be asking for academic references, you want to be asking almost always. Certainly, if you are applying if you went to did undergraduate work in the US, you want your academic recommender to have a PhD. It's unfortunate. I think, I do not have my PhD yet, and I won't write letters of recommendation for grad school for students that I've taught at a university level, because I just know they won't be considered on the same level as someone with a PhD. It's unfortunate because I feel like I know those students really well, and I think I could recommend them really well, but it would be doing them a disservice. So unfortunately, this is one where you want people with that doctorate if you're doing academic. It can be a little bit different for those of you applying from schools outside of the US, but you want a doctorate. You want someone who's worked with you. And then, I think, in general, you want people who are above you, whether those are professors or bosses, and then you want people who can write strong letters. The next question we get often is, when should I ask? You want to ask early, partly just because of courtesy, and partly because you're waiting on somebody else. It's a lot of effort to write a letter of recommendation, especially a really strong one. And so you want to make sure you get on people's radar, you give them enough time. Now, we're in a weird sort of season for this, for those of you who are asking for academic letters, because I wouldn't advise you not to ask right now, but it is summer. Some people aren't checking their university emails. You may be a little bit slower to get a response right now. So it can be worth asking, but some of you may have to, wait until classes start up again in the fall. And then, a really common question I get from students, before I answer that, before I move on to that, let me also say that when you reach out to ask for that letter of rec, you want to go ahead and sort of have a short, concise email ask. You want to say, hi, so-and-so, reintroduce yourself if they don't know you very well. You can say, I took your the workshop on, such and such, or your seminar on this. Tell them why you're asking them to be a recommender. Is their class the class that made you want to go to grad school? Is their class the class that made you think about the question that animates your research? Is there the job you worked with them where you realized what you wanted to be your professional experience? Tell them why. Give them a little bit of information. Tell them, the types of programs you're applying to, and then ask them, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? It's also good in the initial ask to give a ballpark of how many schools you're applying to, and when your first deadline will be. And then let them know that if they are willing and able to write you a strong letter of recommendation, that you'll follow up with materials. Once they say yes, it's good to provide them with some material. So I generally tell students to include a draft of their SOP or personal statement, their transcript, and maybe if you don't have a super close relationship with particularly the professors, a copy of any work you did for their class. That can be really helpful for them as well. Shelley just asked in the chat, do we need to ask the recommender to highlight certain aspects? I don't think you necessarily need to ask. I didn't ask any of my recommenders to talk about a specific sort of thing. I picked recommenders who I knew could talk about my research and writing ability. So I started there. I think giving them a copy, a draft of your SOP or your personal statement will then let them sort of read through, see what your goals are, see what you're talking about, and be able to speak closely to that. So that's why I recommend that you provide that as well. They can write a stronger letter if they know what you're asking for. Yeah, and so then Jen has a great question here about how to trigger recommenders to avoid using language that might trigger gender bias. This is a big problem in applications, in letters. Hopefully one that there's been more education about. I think in those cases, if you were concerned that there's a particular recommender who may use that kind of language, I think steering them in the direction of like, what do you think that they can speak to? And you can do this sort of subtly. You can say, as you'll see in my SOP, I am really interested in project management in the research realm. My work with you helps demonstrate these 3 skills that I really developed together. And that kind of points them towards talking about specific things. Got lots of letters of recommendation questions coming in. I love it. I'm gonna answer one question here on the slide, and then I'll come back to y'all's questions. So a really common thing I get from people is, what if I don't have anyone to ask? I've been out of school for a while, or I didn't develop relationships with folks. What do I do? Am I out of luck? No. If you've been out of school for a couple of years, or if you feel like you don't have really close relationships, you didn't go to office hours, still reach out to anybody that you worked with in a relevant field that you got a good grade in the class, and just tell them a little bit about yourself. Tell them what you enjoyed about their class. It's much more common than you think that people are asking recommenders in that way. So you want to reach out like that. If you've been out of school for longer, it can be harder. And in those cases, for those of you who've been out of school for 10 plus years, and schools are asking for academic letters, that's a good place where you want to reach out to a director of graduate studies and explain, I've been in the workforce for 10 years. My professors are no longer at the university that I was at, things like that. And then ask, I maybe provide I have some business recommenders that I think could speak to these abilities. That's where I would start with that. If you don't have anyone to ask, also just think broadly. There are more people that are available than I think you think. Okay, we got a bunch of letters of rec questions. So let me make sure I'm not missing any of these. We've got a question about not wanting current boss to know about my application. Can I use a previous boss? Yeah, that's fine. That's really common as well. You know, not wanting to know someone to know that you're applying is not new. It's something that you want to again, ask someone who can give you a strong letter, but someone who's worked with you. It doesn't have to be your current boss. So if applications are due in December, when should we approach the recommender? How much time should we give them? I think that, you know, you want to reach out no later than September if stuff is due in December. It's a long amount of time, but you're getting on the radar. Doesn't mean they're going to write that letter right away, but you're asking early. And then you should let them know when they say yes that you'll be following up, just to make sure, you know, everything's going well. You can follow up about a month out. But I would ask no later than the end of September if applications are due in December. The other reason is that, you know, December is a busy time of the year, especially for academics. You'll have professors that are giving finals, who are going on vacation, and who have a lot of other letters of recommendation to write, both for people applying to grad school and people applying to funding, for funding. So you want to make sure you get on that calendar earlier rather than later. Is there an email template? We do share for our Magoosh subscribers, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, our admission subscribers. We do have some email templates that we can help with that. Should the letter of recommendation be general for all universities? Okay, that's a great question. Generally, what will happen is your recommenders will write one letter, and then they'll just update it for each of the schools. And by update it, I mean, for most people who are writing it, they'll literally just change the like salutation and the addressing. They'll only write one letter. I applied to a lot of schools. I applied to somewhere between 12 and 14. I can't remember the exact number now. They weren't writing 14 individual letters. My recommenders wrote one letter and then changed it, changed the sort of heading and stuff for each university. So you're not asking them you're asking them to do a lot of work, but not, you know, write a specific letter. There are some people some recommenders who may, for one or two universities, write a different letter if they like know people at that university and they're speaking directly to them, but generally they'll just write one. Would it be a problem if I had one letter from an academic and two more letters from non-academic researchers? I don't think that that's a problem. If you were applying for a PhD, a research-related degree, and all of your recommenders are coming from a research sort of background and can speak to your ability to do research, that doesn't seem to be a problem. Those are academic references, even though they're not technically academic researchers. There's still people who can speak to your research ability. Where it would be a problem, I think, Irene, is if you were applying to a PhD program, a research-based program, and you were applying with one research-based sort of letter and then two that, you know, spoke of just some general sort of capabilities. We got a ton of questions. I'm going to call a bit of an audible here because we got 12 minutes left, and I'm not going to go forward with the next slide. I'm going to answer your questions instead. We'll have to come back and do another one of these. I was about to talk about the SOP and the personal statement, but we will be having another webinar about that in a couple of weeks. And you can go to our past webinars page to see a little bit more about writing. Instead, I'm just going to answer your questions. So go ahead and submit them. We got 12 minutes together. Let's try to get as many of these questions in. While I'm doing that, I'm going to put up this page. We can offer more help. So you've heard me talk about Magoosh admission subscribers. We have a self-study course and access to some paid channels on our Discord, which I will post in the chat before the end of this. You can also get the Discord link by following this QR code. You can learn more about getting more help from us and more access to us there. All right, more questions. So one of my professors I want to ask a letter from is still a PhD student. She told me that a letter from her would not have as much weight as a professor with a lab higher experiences. Yeah, she's right. I would say, if at all possible, you want to ask someone else. Unfortunately, this person probably can speak better to your abilities than some of those other people, but that PhD in hand really matters. It really is important. So unfortunately, in this case, I would see what other options I have before. I would say that as someone who is in this person's place, I will not write letters for students because I know that it just would not help them, and I want to help them. Are research assistant and teaching assistant experiences an advantage for applying for a PhD? Yeah, they can certainly help. They're not necessary for most programs. I think that, so for those of you who don't have that, don't worry. It won't necessarily, it's not going to disqualify you, but it does help. And I think what's really important, Hassan, is you not just listing your research assistant and teaching assistant experiences in your CV or saying that you did that in your SOP, but talking about what skills and knowledge you gained from those experiences. Tell us not just that you did it, but what did they matter? Being that research assistant, what questions did that prompt in you? How did that help you decide that this is the field that you want to pursue? What methods did you learn? Make those a part of your story. So it's not just saying, schools aren't looking to like tick off the box of like, oh, yep, research assistant. That's what we're looking for. They want to know how being a research assistant got you to this point and what skills it gave you. Mark's asking, what information about each university should we provide our recommenders for the letters of recommendations? You don't need to provide a lot here, Mark. I think that the key thing that you want to do is tell your advisors, what program you're applying to. So I'm applying to a history PhD program. I want to focus on this. Your SOP, your general SOP will tell a lot of that. The thing you want to make sure that you flag for recommenders is if you're applying to different types of programs. So if you're applying to, I don't know, a history department at one school and a media studies department at another school, that's something that you want to make sure that you flag for them. But mostly you don't need to provide too much detailed information. And what will happen is when you're filling out those application forms, you will go ahead and input the recommender's name. The school itself will send an email with some instructions for them. Okay, in the case we ask a previous boss for a recommendation, is there a guideline on how far back? In general, you want sooner, you want closer to now experiences than further back. That's just going to generally be a stronger letter, and also stop people from wondering like, well, all of your recommendations are from 5+ years ago. What have you been doing for the last 5 years? There are some, wiggle room here. Someone that you worked with 5 years ago, maybe you've stayed in touch with and can give a lot of a really strong recommendation. Maybe you go with them, but in general, closer is better. If my instructors ask me to write a draft and send it to them, should I make sure they're both different? So in general, I think you should avoid doing this. You want people to write on their own. And I know that this is particularly for students whose recommenders are based at institutions outside of the US. It's more common to ask for a draft that they'll touch up. There's a different sort of culture of letters of rec. Letters of rec are a very US centric thing. But I think in general, you want to avoid that. You want your recommender's voice to come out. But if you do have to write a draft for your instructors, yeah, you want to make sure that these are different drafts. You want to make sure it would be a red flag if they got 2 letters that sounded the same. Um, so studying for the GRE 2 to 4 hours a day for a month. I think 2 to 4 hours a day for as long as you need. I would start with a 3-month plan and work down from there, if possible. So we've got a question here. Let's see. As an application, been out of school for 5+ years, no recent writing samples. Yeah, this is tough. I think that what I would do in this case is see if there is an older writing sample that is in the area that you want to pursue, that's good from your undergraduate years, and go back and rework on that. Going back and looking at more recent scholarship, updating that. You're going to have to do a little bit more work, unfortunately. But I would, rather than starting from square one, I would see if there's something that I could start with and punch up, kind of update. Is there a study group for GMAT and GRE that I can join? We're trying to connect people on our Discord for the GMAT and the GRE. We also have some live class options through Magoosh that you can check out as well. But I recommend hopping in our Discord and seeing if there's some other students that would want to work on this. There are a ton of questions coming in and I really appreciate it. I am going to acknowledge right now we've got 5 minutes left and I am not going to be able to get to all of these. I apologize for that. I'm going to lightning round, see how many I can answer really quickly, but I'm also going to let you all know that I will later today record a follow-up video answering the questions I didn't get to. I'll post that along with the recording of today's webinar in our Discord. So join the Discord. I will get to your questions eventually. Great tip here from Jen about not having letter of recommendation writers. Definitely in the chat, take a look at that. If you live close to a university, taking graduate level classes as a non-degree student is great. Going to seminars, developing relationships, that's really, really helpful. Can I apply to both master's and PhD programs at the same university? Usually, yes. You're going to want to double check at your university to see that you're applying to if this is possible. Sometimes it'll be one application altogether, and you can indicate that if you don't get into the PhD, you want to be considered for the master's. Sometimes they will have specific rules, but usually, yes. Can a student be awarded a research assistantship even if his or her recommender did not mention in the letter of recommendation? Yeah, so research assistantships get determined in different ways. If the research assistantship is through a PI, a principal investigator, through their grant, you're going to, at the university, you're going to want to communicate directly with them to get that. But research assistantships usually are considered in a sort of holistic way. I am going to keep answering questions, but real quick, going to drop this Discord link so you can join us over there and get more of my answers. You can also find that on the Magoosh at Admissions page. Okay, a couple more questions. We got 2 minutes. Oh my gosh. Should I include my tutoring experience in my CV? Yeah, I think that including teaching experience is worthwhile. You want to speak to, you know, how that tutoring experience in 1 or 2 sentences, you know, what skills did you come out of it with, and how are they going to help you going forward? Aside from directly emailing PIs or checking their personal website, how can you efficiently find out who is taking graduate students? Unfortunately, the best way to do it is reaching out directly. Checking labs as well and seeing if the lab says, you know, we're taking on new students for this year. But unfortunately, this is part of the process that just takes a while and involves you writing a lot of emails. So I wish I had a better answer. Mark's asking, should resumes be 1 page or can they be 2 pages? If they're asking specifically for a resume, you probably, unless they indicate that it should be 1 page, you could do a 2-pager. If they're asking for a CV, it can be as long as it includes everything important in it. All right, we got 1 minute left. Oh, will it be possible if I can list the colleges that waive the GRE? Unfortunately, no. Again, this is one where you're going to have to do individual research. I think there are some schools that maybe haven't even decided for the fall yet. I don't have a comprehensive list. I don't know of anyone right now that does. If you ask them in Discord, I can poke around a little, but this changes from school to school on an individual basis. Should I include a retail job on my CV? I would generally say no, unless that retail job really specifically impacts your application in some way. The CV isn't including everything you've ever done. What it is like your relevant experiences. So if for some reason that retail experience helped you figure out what you want to do and gave you skills that are going to be important in the program, then yes, but in general, no. Okay, I know we're right at time. If they ask for a CV or a resume, which should be provided? Oh, the Magoosh.admission link doesn't work. I'm sorry about that. Are you trying the? I'll double check, see what's going on there, and we'll send an email. Definitely get on the Discord. We'll get the link in there as well. Final question: if they're asking for a CV or resume, I would say, Mark, go with a CV just because you have more room to play with. It means more work for you, but it's more opportunity to tell people stuff. Yeah, these were a great set of questions. Clearly, you had a ton of them because I didn't get to all of them, but I will record that video later today of questions I didn't get to. And then especially, I know we have a couple of questions in the chat about funding. I will talk a little bit more about funding in that video. We'll be having another one of these next week at, let's see, different time, next Wednesday at noon Pacific. We will be talking about the GRE and how it fits into your applications. You can find out more about that and register on our webinars page on the admissions. Join Discord. I'll answer more questions. Until next time that we talk, I hope the application process works well for you, that it's less stressful, and ask me questions whenever you can. All right, y'all, have a good rest of your day.